Okay, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so definition. We're going to define what slope is. Slope is going to measure the steepness of a line. By the ratio of the change in y coordinates, to the change in x coordinates. There we go. Okay, so slope is going to measure the steepness of a line. So there's a couple ways you can think about it, right? You could have a line that goes upwards from left to right. It would look like this. So if a line is going up, we call that a positive slope. That's if the line is going up. And then you could have a negative slope, right? You could have a line that's going downwards as you go from left to right. And that's called a negative slope. So you could have a slope that's positive. You could have a slope that's negative. So if you want to think about it another way, you can think about it as hiking, right? If you're hiking up a hill, that hill is going to have positive slope. But if you're going back down the hill, that hill is going to have a negative slope. And it's going to look like that. Okay. And then there are two more exceptions, right? You could have a zero slope, which would just be a horizontal line. This would be called zero slope. If your slope is zero, there is no steepness to the line. It's just a horizontal line, right? Horizontal. So here your line is completely horizontal, but then you could have an example where the line is completely vertical. So let's draw a vertical line over here. This would be undefined slope. Undefined. So this is undefined slope, or you could call it vertical. Okay, so those are the two special cases. But for most of your homework, you're going to be looking at positive slope and negative slope. Okay? So there's a way we can calculate this using a formula. And the formula is going to be m equals, and m is going to stand for slope. M is going to stand for slope. M is going to be equal to the change in y over the change in x. And this triangle right here is the Greek letter delta. So let me zoom in on this so you can see it better. This is delta, and it's just a Greek letter. Delta means change. So you're going to have change in y on the top, but you're going to have change in x on the bottom. And it's always going to be that way. You're always going to put your y coordinates on top, and you're always going to put your x coordinates on the bottom. Okay? So the way this is going to be done is you're going to have y2 minus y1 at the top. So what I'm doing is I'm subtracting my y's at the top, as usual, and I'm subtracting my x's at the bottom. So you're going to have x2 minus x1 at the bottom. So change in y is going to be on top. Change in x is going to be at the bottom. And we can also think about this as rise over run, right? And if you've ever heard of that before, the rise is just going to be the change in y coordinates, but the run is going to be the change in x coordinates. So you can also think about it that way. And this is going to be for 2 points. This is going to be for 2 points, x1 comma y1 and x2 comma y2. So if I was to give you 2 points, you could put it in this formula and find out what the slope is. And that's going to be what your first homework is going to be about. Okay? I do want to put a fact right here. Fact. For the ordered pair, x comma y, the x coordinate always comes first. The x coordinate comes first. And the y coordinate comes second. There we go. The y coordinate comes second. So it's always going to be x comma y, and it's never going to be the other way around. So the x coordinate is always going to come first. The y coordinate is always going to come second. And if I give you 2 points like that, you can put them in the formula and figure out what the slope is. Okay? I'll leave that up there for a few minutes so you can get it. And then we'll look at some of the examples that I have on the problem sets. And I'll leave the classwork for you to do for homework. Let me zoom out a little. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so there are 4 kinds of slope. It could be positive, it could be negative, it could be 0, or it could be undefined. And you'll see what that looks like a little bit later. Undefined is the weirdest because you're actually dividing by 0 at the very end. Okay. Let's look at some of the problem sets. Let's look at number 1. So we're given 2 points, 1, 1, and 0, negative 2. And our slope formula is always going to be y2 minus y1 at the top and x2 minus x1 at the bottom. This is primarily what we're going to be using. Okay, so looking at these 2 points, I have an x coordinate and I have a y coordinate. So my x is 1 and my y is 1. And then over here, I'm also going to have an x coordinate coming first and a y coordinate going second. And I'm going to label this x1, y1, and I'm going to label these x2, y2. And the 1 and the 2 just means this is my first point, this is my second point. Okay, so let's put this in the formula. So my y2 is going to be on top. So I'm going to have m equals y2 minus y1. I know that y2 is negative 2. Then I put a minus in between, and I know my y1 is going to be 1, so I'm subtracting 1 at the top. So I put my y coordinates at the top, I put my x coordinates at the bottom. So what's my x2? That's going to be 0, right? Minus, okay. What's my x1? That's going to be 1. Okay. So then I work at the top and the bottom, and then we're going to divide them at the very end. So at the top, I've got -2 minus 1. That's going to give me -3. But then at the bottom, I have 0 minus 1. And we know that that's going to be -1, right? So I've got -3 divided by -1, and that's going to give me +3. So that's going to be the slope. So if my slope is 3, that means my slope is going to be positive. So I'm going to have a line that looks kind of like this. It's going to be going up from left to right. Okay, let's look at number 2. Now for number 2, we've got 3, 0, and we've got 2, 5. All right, so once again, my x is always going to come first inside the parentheses. So this is an x coordinate, and this is an x coordinate. My y is always going to come second. So my y is going to be right here and here. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to label my numbers. So this is x1, y1. This is x2, y2. Okay. So let's put them in that formula that I have up here. So at the top, we're subtracting the y coordinates, right? I'm going to have 5 minus 0. So I take y2, I subtract y1. And then at the bottom, you know I'm subtracting the x coordinates. So I'm going to have 2 minus 3. 2 minus 3. So then I work on the top, I work on the bottom, and then we're going to divide at the very end. Okay, so 5 minus 0 is going to give me 5. 2 minus 3 is going to give me -1. So I've got 5 divided by -1, right? And that's going to give me -5. -5 is my answer. So unlike the first one, this one is negative, right? If I have a negative number for my answer, that means that the slope is going to be negative. So instead of having a line that goes up, I'm going to have a line that goes down. It's going to look like this, sort of. Okay, let's look at 3. So 3 says I'm going to have -4, 18, and I'm going to have -14, 18. So these are the 2 points that they give me. I notice that the y coordinates are the same. That's going to help me out when I get to the formula. I know that the x's are always going to come first inside the parentheses, right? So this is an x, and this is an x. The y's are always going to come second inside the parentheses. So I know that this is going to be my y coordinate, and this is going to be my y coordinate. All right. Then this is my first point. This is my second point. Okay. So now I just feed those numbers into the formula. So just like that first one, I'm going to subtract my y's on top. I'm going to have y2 minus y1. That's going to be 18 minus 18. What's going to be at the bottom? My x coordinates, right? I'm going to have -14 minus a -4. And I'm putting this in parentheses so I don't get the negatives confused. Okay, So now I can work on the top and the bottom. So at the top, 18 minus 18 is going to give me 0. And on the bottom, I'm going to get negative 10. Because that double negative is going to give me a positive, right? So 0 divided by negative 10, that's going to give me 0. 0 is my answer. So I have a 0 slope this time. So what does that mean the line is going to look like? If I have a 0 slope, it's like I'm not walking up a hill or walking down a hill. It's just going to be level ground. So I'm going to have a horizontal line that looks like this, completely flat. That's what 0 slope means. Okay? So 0 is my answer for that one. Let's look at the next one. I've got negative 1, negative 19, and I've got negative 1, negative 2. So these are the 2 points that they give me. I'm going to have the x's coming first, and I'm going to have the y's coming second. So I've got x1, y1, x2, y2. So now I'm ready to put it in the formula. M stands for slope. So I'm going to have the y's being subtracted on top, right? Now, if I'm subtracting the y's, I'm going to have negative 2 minus negative 19. So I'm going to have negative 2 minus negative 19. There's a lot of negatives going on, so I'm going to put the negative 19 in parentheses. But then the x's have to be subtracted on the bottom. So what are my x's? Negative 1 minus what? Negative 1. Okay. So now I've got all the numbers where I want them to be. Now I can work on the top, then the bottom, and then I'll divide them both. So what's negative 2 minus negative 19? That's actually going to be positive 17, because that minus minus is going to change into a plus, right? So 17 is going to be on top. But what's going to be out the bottom? Well, I've got negative 1 minus negative 1. That's the same thing as negative 1 plus 1. So I'm going to get 0 at the bottom. So now notice that I'm dividing by 0. Dividing by 0 is undefined. So this is going to be an undefined slope. This only happens if I'm dividing by 0. It doesn't happen any other way. For the last one, notice that 0 was on top. That's why I got 0 for my answer. Down here, 0 is at the bottom. I'm dividing by 0 this time. That's why it's undefined, and it's not equal to 0 like the last one. So if I have an undefined slope, what is that going to look like? Well, going back to my first page, I know that my undefined slope is going to give me a vertical line. So the line is going to be completely vertical this time. So it's going to look like this. Just a vertical line. And if we have a vertical line, that means that the slope is undefined for that one. Okay? I'll do one more from the problem set, and then I'll let you guys go. I'll leave this up there for about a minute longer so you can get it. And then we'll work on number 5. So there's only 4 types of slope that you can get, right? You could have a positive slope, you could have a negative slope, you could have a 0, and an undefined. Those are the only 4 types that we have. A line can't be drawn any other way, right? Okay, let's look at number 5. So for number 5, the last one that we're going to do, I have 1, 0, and I have 2, -4. So these are the 2 points that they give me. And I know that the slope formula is going to be y2 minus y1 at the top and x2 minus x1 at the bottom. Okay, so labeling my points, I know that the x is always going to come first and the y is always going to come second. So this is an x and this is a y. Now, I also know this is my first point and this is my second point. So I'm going to write x1, y1, and x2, y2. So now I know exactly which numbers to put inside here, right? I'm going to have m equals, subtract the y's on top. So I'm going to have -4 minus 0. That's going to give me a -4. And then at the bottom, I'm going to subtract my x coordinates. So I'm going to have 2 minus 1. 2 minus 1. Okay, so working with the top, I know that -4 minus 0 is just going to give me -4, right? If I'm subtracting 0, nothing changes there. But I have 2 minus 1 at the bottom, that's going to give me 1. So now I have -4 on top, 1 at the bottom. So I'm dividing -4 by 1. That's just going to leave me unchanged with a -4. So this is going to be a negative slope, right? My line is going to be a downward line, so it's going to be going this way. It's going to look something like that. So when we meet up on Wednesday, we'll learn how to graph these lines and how to get the slope from a graph. Now, some people ask me, can you change the order of these in the formula? And the answer is actually yes. You can change the order of it. So we know that the slope formula is going to be y2 minus y1 at the top, and we're going to have x2 minus x1 at the bottom. And this is just going to be a quick note. But this is the formula that we all know. We've known it since Algebra 1. And what we can do with this is we can actually switch the order of these and get the same exact answer. So I could do y1 minus y2, and then at the bottom, I could have x1 minus x2. Notice how we're still subtracting the y's at the top. We're still subtracting the y's at the top. That hasn't changed. We're still subtracting the x's on the bottom. But the only difference between these formulas is I've got the first coordinate going, and then we're subtracting the second coordinate. So this actually works too. So we're going to try number 5 again, but we're going to use this formula instead, because these two are the exact same formulas, as you'll see. So if I've got these 2 points, 1, 0, and 2, -4, what I can do is I can do y1 minus y2, right? So just labeling them again, I know I'm going to have x1, y1, and x2, y2. Just labeling the points again. And this time, we're going to do y1 minus y2 on the top. And we're going to do x1 minus x2 at the bottom. So what is this going to look like? I'm going to have 0 minus -4. Because I'm doing y1 minus y2. And then at the bottom, I'm going to have x1 minus x2. So it's going to look like 1 minus 2. Okay, so at the top, I'm going to get a +4. At the bottom, I'm going to get a -1. And then what happens when I divide these two numbers? I'm going to get the exact same answer that I did up there, right? I'm still going to get a -4. So both of these formulas work. It's just, you got to choose which one you want to use. And typically, we teach this one because it's the easiest to remember. But they both work.